work on securing your supply. How can you reduce lead time? Because you're bleeding out both ends, or you got your lead times coming up, it's going higher, and then yet your prices are also going higher. Right? Usually you want to have one or the other. You pay higher price and you get a shorter lead time. Not get both, right? Not have a higher price and higher lead time. There's definitely issues going on in the microchip supply chain, and we're really starting to see that.
So much of that leadership, and it's a leadership style of influence that makes this possible. Today we're going to be talking about the microchip situation with Taiwan and China, something everyone's been thinking about. And I found a few slides that I just want to kind of share with us and just kind of see what our thoughts are and then kind of go from there. So what do you think? Is that good?
Sounds good.
All right. So one of the things I found was, Taiwan, where they rely on their trade. Here we got the US, Germany, Japan, Saudi Arabia. And we look at this slide, we see that a lot of business, they do a lot of trade with other countries. What do you feel or think about when you see this slide?
First thing I notice is the big gap in the US, right? 62% is we were the ones that are importing majority of, but ain't the ones making it, right?
Right. So we're relying heavily on what Taiwan produces, which is the chips, and I found this graphic. This was something I thought was really interesting. And that when you look at all the chip makers that are out there, Taiwan, South Korea, Taiwan, America, China, Taiwan, there's a lot of folks out there, or a lot of companies that are really just Taiwan. So Taiwan is the majority where all the chips are made. And like you just said, US relies on that chip. And we'll talk a little bit here about being impacted. But how do you feel from a resilience point of view, having all of a critical component coming from one specific country?
Yeah, not good, right? It's just you want to have some kind of little bit of difference in geographical locations, right? You need to have some diversity is what I meant to say, right? In your supply chain, relying all on one country. We know how things are going in China right now with the geopolitical issues. Hear it all over in the news all the time, and on YouTube, wherever you go online, you always see China about to invade Taiwan. Granted, if it happens or not, which seems to be it's going to happen tomorrow every time I look on the news, right? It's just that's also not important. That's not a good sign, right? If China invades Taiwan, what's that going to do to our microchips, right?
Right. Yeah, but even then, think about it. Go back to that slide. Let's take a look at that. Even China makes, the US does not make a lot of chips. They're made in Taiwan, China, and South Korea. So it's all kind of consolidated in that Asian area.
Southeast Asia, yep.
Yeah, right there. So even if, China were to invade Taiwan and take that, technology, control it, I think what would happen would be just like what Russia's experiencing with the oil industry, where they had all this oil infrastructure built up by these companies. And then when they invaded Ukraine, they left, right? They left, and those companies left. And what they did, they took the talent with them. So even though Russia has all this infrastructure, they don't have anybody to run it. It doesn't matter. So, think about that and, how that would affect all the different areas that are out there.
It's interesting too, Randy, right? In the 90s, I read up that United States was actually the inventors of the semiconductors. And now you look in 2020, 23, look at the difference. Right now, everything's manufactured outside of the United States. If you see a lot of stuff that says designed in the United States and then manufactured somewhere else, say like China, the older iPhones, you'd see designed in California, made in China.
Right. Yeah, and this slide here shows a lot of that chip production, how it's shifted and how it's been going, shifting away from the traditional strongholds as it's going there, as you mentioned before. Where chips were made and where chips are made now in 2020s, big shift from the US, Europe, Japan. China wasn't even a player back here in the early 1990s. And then in 2000, they started to get into the game. And then 2010, they got a little bit bigger share. In 2020, a little bit bigger share. And then projecting 2030, a little bit more share. But as we can see down here, the balance is shifted. The U.S. is not in the trade. So what do you think that's going to, do you think that's going to change in the future with some of the things that the U.S. is doing right now?
Well, I know they're trying their best right now, right? And it's like it's kind of too late going back to principles of resilience, right? Trying to before something happens to be proactive and figure it out. It seems like with everything going on now, it's more of a reactive thing. And now we're starting to notice that, oh my God, we need microchips. China's threatening to invade Taiwan. Now they're reacting. What are we going to do? Now they're starting to actually look at the entire microchip supply base, right, and see where this stuff's coming from and seeing what can we do. There's been a lot of investment now in the United States to make microchips, in these factories, but that takes time, right, Randy? It's not just something you switch on overnight, and especially something so complex as microchips. It's gonna take some time to get us caught up.
What was the company? Micron. Micron is doing a $20 billion investment to build infrastructure to make microchips.
Yeah,
just now, like now they're
40,
building it now.
40 billion, Randy. 40
billion
in Arizona.
And then the U.S. is offering, some incentives for them to do that. So they're giving some things there. But they passed the CHIPS Act to motivate companies to do this type of thing. And how long can we even anticipate it'll take before these factories are up and running and productive to the point to be able to replace this? And I think this next slide kind of illustrates the point of where things are made currently here, in 2020. This, if you think about this where the billions of dollars of microchip exports, right? So these companies are exporting microchips. Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, just reiterates what we were talking about before, how it all kind of comes from that Asian area. Hong Kong, China, 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 Singapore, China, Taiwan, soon to be China. Something like that. Hope not. No, and that's a good question. And even South Korea, as we talked about. USA, very, very tiny. Japan, even smaller. Vietnam's up and coming, but still small. Malaysia, still small. And the Philippines, all these are small producers of microchips. But like you were talking about, from a resilience point of view, it's all kind of over in that area. And now it's going to take time. So as a buyer, as a category manager of, let's say, microchips or technology that relies on microchips, what are some of the things you're thinking right now?
Man, I'm thinking about the security of the supply of my supply chain of the materials that I need. And even just personally, me seeing myself as a buyer, I'm just seeing lead times extrapolate. Prices are just through the roof, right? Some of these resistors, and especially these complex microchips in the aerospace industry that I'm dealing with, some are like over a year just to get your parts, right?
Yeah,
when I was in space and defense at Moog, working on more outer space stuff and satellites, which are even more complex. Those would be almost up to 2 years, a year and a half, just to get, material. It used to be 6 months, 7 months, if that. Now we just see months at a time. It just continues to extrapolate out. When you're talking about being a commodity manager, right? You want to work on securing your supply. How can you reduce lead time? Because you're bleeding out both ends, or you got your lead times coming up, it's going higher, and then yet your prices are also going higher, right? Usually you want to have one or the other. You pay higher price and you get a shorter lead time. Not get both, right? Not have a higher price and higher lead time. There's definitely issues going on in the microchip supply chain, and we're really starting to see that now.
But yeah, and you just said, you're planning 1 to 2 years out, and think about back before 2020 when the pandemic hit. In 2019, you were thinking 2020, 21, 22, and then the pandemic hit, and that just delayed everything and pushed whatever your 2-year timeline was out to 3 year, 4 years now. So as supply chain managers, that are in the career field doing this, it really emphasizes the need to have a big picture of everything going on. And a lot of our directors and vice presidents and senior managers have that experience, but they haven't been driving that experience down to the lower levels, and just, highlights the need for the training that you and I've talked about in the past to make sure that everyone starts with a foundation of supply chain management. And the CPSM is one way to do that. Go through a boot camp, get that knowledge, just drive it home, and that way you can get your whole team up to a certain level and then go to that next level, because CPSM is a broad certification that looks at the supply chain from end to end, from raw materials all the way over. And then you and I were talking about putting this on was kind of like, so what there's microchips, what does that really mean? And one of the slides we found was this one, is that the automobile industry, how it's different and how it's consuming microchips, right? The cost of cars is just so expensive right now, so expensive. And this is the impact, and we can see it.
It's interesting too to see it start going back down from 2020, right? From when they started having COVID and now starting having issues with the global supply chain and just supply chain issues in general. A lot of these automotive companies. I remember specifically hearing about Ford and F-150s, about how getting these chips was hard, right? It's just one of many different inputs in the microchip supply chain that creates these issues, right? It's not just only cars and stuff like that, but it's definitely such a major impact. A lot of cars are now starting to get more and more microchips, right? All these new cars have how many screens on them, ran by computers. Imagine those Teslas, right? How many microchips those have, just from charging it and everything else. Oh, and there you go. There's another one.
This was our slide that kind of illustrates your points and how much they rely on microchips. You mentioned the Ford F trucks, F series.
There you go.
Huge impact on that one line and how they started to rely on a certain piece of the supply chain and how it really impacted them. Like you said, all these companies, all these cars out there that have this level of technology inside their vehicles, and then that critical component we could call a bottleneck component, in the CryoGen matrix that we talked about a lot. That's a small, not very expensive, but if you don't have it, things don't run. When was the last time you bought a new car?
Several years ago.
Right.
Think about it, during COVID, it was even the prices were about the same, right? You could get like a used car for just as much as a new car. It was pretty interesting to see that. Going back to that chart too about with the trucks, I know one of the things Ford did was to try to help prioritize orders. They went from being able to, you go to a lot and you can just buy any car you want, right, at the dealer. Now they went through a more of a order it, make to buy order, right? So you get the truck and you just add it on whatever you wanted to, make to order, and they would make the truck for you. And those orders were the ones that are getting priority because it also gave more of basically a firm demand where they understood what they needed, when they needed it by, and they were able to prioritize those trucks, right? They went away from the models of just making all these trucks, pushing it out to everyone, and then hopefully somebody buys it, right? So
that's interesting. It kind of brings up a shift in, in something you and I have talked about a lot, is like, how many cars do you need? How come you have to buy a car every 3 or 5 years? Or if you have someone that custom makes a car like this, like you just described, that they custom make it the way they want it, and then they order it, and then they have it for 20 years. So they don't buy a car every 3 to 5 years. They order it once and they drive it for 20 or 30 years.
Or even from like a supply even from just a supply chain standpoint, right, Randy, you're able to see what is needed and when. You're able to, right, if multiple people are ordering, you can have this, like I said, firm demand. You know how many microchips you need for 10 F-150s. The customer put a down payment. We already know they need it, right? You prioritize them and you make it to how the order was. It's a lot easier to forecast the demand, right, and get to order to the demand rather than, like I said, having all these dealerships and just pushing out every color, every style, every type they can. Seems to be more of an efficient from a supply chain standpoint as well for that kind of strategy.
Yeah, it does. It does make, maybe not from a national economic gross domestic product GDP point of view, right? Where now we're not making cars at the rapid rate, pushing out thousands of cars every year in hopes that somebody buys them and they come up with ways to make them buy. Instead, we're throttling that back, saying, okay, if you want a car, order what you want.
So, Randy, too, can't even make it that fast anymore with all of these supply chain material limitations that we're seeing now. You're seeing with microchips, which is probably the leading item on all of these cars being manufactured, right? You're only as fast as your supply chain. So another, right? And that's where going back to supply chain can be a competitive advantage, right? If you're able to bring in more material faster than your competitor, you can build more, you can build faster, right?
Yeah. So if you got a supply chain team that is thinking resilience and thinking strategically and thinking all these different ways, how they're able to maintain an advantage in the market because of that, and here's another graphic that kind of shows how there, all the different components that are being used in microchips, right? Smartphones, vehicles is one small part right here, right?
Yep.
And then we got consumer electronics, which is your TVs, DVD players, those type of things, personal computing, smartphones being a big chunk all the way across the board. Who else? Automotive, industrial electronics, wireless infrastructure, server, data center. We look at these things. Which ones are the ones that are a must-have? Like, I gotta have this.
Oh,
So I can't need a smartphone, right? And I gotta have the newest and greatest one, right? Without my smartphone, I just can't go to bed at night. And but you're right. But think about it. If all of a sudden microchips fall out, there's a big issue. Let's say China were to invade Taiwan. How would that impact these industries, right? Which ones then get priority? Now we have microchips in storage in the warehouse, and we have to use them for certain things. What do we use? So of these, which ones would you pick? Which would be
I
a
would.
priority for you?
Oh man, honestly, for me, I would say like service data centers and storage, being that that's what connects all this equipment. If you have a computer, you have an iPhone, and you don't have the infrastructure, the servers, and the data to connect us all, then it's just paperweight. Right? Or maybe a phone could do a little bit more, the calculators and all that stuff on there. But your phone wouldn't be able to communicate, and that's such a major thing now that we deal with. And it goes back to another thing I was thinking about is during COVID, that kind of accelerated the microchip need, right? We went from people going into the office, right?
Yeah.
Just going into the office, and that's it. Now everybody needs a laptop, right? All these companies at once are ordering laptops to send their people home so that they can work from home. There's COVID, right? So there already was a strained supply chain, and now that extrapolated the issue even more because now these car manufacturers are now fighting with the regular consumer. Right now, then all these all these servers now, there needs to be more because now there's more people talking online and doing more online stuff. If you see with COVID, right, it kind of got this video chat stuff going. This wasn't even really a thing before, right?
Yeah, right. Now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
You can't do anything without
like
it.
Me and you talking right now. You're in Florida. I'm in LA, right? Look at what those servers are doing, what our computers, all these things need chips. Think about the Internet of Things. My door needs to connect to the internet now. My TV connects to the internet. There's just Alexa, right? Alexa connects to the internet. There's just so many things now that are reliant on these chips. And that's why also it takes the importance to understand geopolitical and just big picture stuff in the supply chain, because you need to understand and you can kind of help predict how the market is changing and how that's impacting you.
Yeah. See, and I agree with what you're saying. There's a heavy reliance on technology, but when I looked at this chart, I picked out, for me, was industrial electronics. That was one that I thought was a key infrastructure. And the reason I thought that was important, in addition to everything you said, which I agree with, looking at the industrial electronics, because that makes the food, that creates the vehicles, and that allows the manufacturing equipment to move, and the calibrations and all the different parts to make it all work to do things. That's when everything you say I agree with. And then I'm looking at, well, industrial electronics, that's another area to where if we say we only had let's say 100 million chips, that's it. China's invade Taiwan. Now we can expect at least 10 years before the chip industry is going to get back on its feet and start producing the way it is producing right now. We're just going to throw that out there. Now I have to use those 100 million chips in a specific way. I have to prioritize. It's where a government agency or a government would step in and say, okay, the priority is . And I think, data servers and communication would be one. Let's pull that slide back up. Data servers, absolutely, because that's where all the information is. Wired, wireless, that's communication. And then industrial electronics would be the other one, because that's the stuff that helps the world move with food, beans, bullets, and band-aids, all those different things that just make it work. In automotive, your car is what your car. You're just not getting a new car. You got to repair your old car.
Yeah.
Consumer electronics, TVs. I don't need a new TV. I just use my phone. Personal computer. I don't. How fast does my personal computer need to be? And same thing. And then smartphones. So smartphones kind of connects it all together. As you can see here, smartphones was a big one. And this is revenue. So, this is by revenue. So this is where they're making money.
Randy, it'll be interesting too to see, be interesting to see how, people like Apple, those kinds of companies, how they're going to change their kind of maybe their business strategy, right? Are they still going to make it where every year you're buying a new iPhone? Can they continue to make new ones all the time, right? It's going to be interesting to see what they do and how they strategize with this whole limit on microchips.
Well, I think they did what I assumed they did, or assume is not a good word, but just a guess is, we went from big screen phones down to smaller screen phones, right? And what I think happened during COVID is they said, okay, we can't get new stuff, the new big screens. Instead, let's see what's in the warehouse. And they went back to the warehouse and they said, okay, this is what we have left. And with that, they said that this is what we'll make. We'll make smaller screens and we'll call it a new iPhone. And actually, here's a good one. I don't know if I can make it bigger.
Charge them double.
And charge them double. And charge them double. But this was a good stat or a good slide that kind of described where all the components come from for the iPhone itself. From that iPhone. And then, when we were talking the other day, kind of noticed that China controls the Wi-Fi chips, which I thought was really interesting. And China also controls the batteries. So the means of communication within the iPhone and the power of the iPhone is controlled by China. So it's very interesting. And they assemble it there as well, right?
Yep.
So all these other parts are getting sent to China. So China has the warehouse full of these components to build iPhones or whatever they choose to build, which is, really interesting how it all they put it all together, right? From a security or resilience point of view, we have to kind of step back and look at this and say it's kind of interesting how one country has put themselves in critical places, right? It's kind of like if you remember the movie 300, right, where the Spartans defended, Sparta, and how they went to a very small choke point, right? And that's where they held the defense, and they weren't going to get past that point unless they went through that very small junction. If you look at that components on the iPhone, and the iPhone's an example, we need to step back and look at it from another point at other components or other categories and say, okay, where does a specific country have control in specific critical areas that if I don't have that one part, this thing doesn't work at all, right? It's not a matter of can I find it. It's like, no, they control it all. And pharmaceuticals was one, that's what we found out during the pandemic when we talked about rare earths and those type of things.
Just think about that too, Randy. It's not only just right from having geographic dispersion of your supply chain. A lot of this, like we said, is in Southeast Asia. What's if there's a big hurricane, or what's if there's some kind of big earthquake, or something happens and they lose their capability?
That happened in Japan, right?
Yeah.
Japan had that earthquake that created a tsunami, and it affected a nuclear plant, but it also affected a lot of production and manufacturing that was going on. And so there's a great example of how natural disasters has nothing to do with geopolitical. It's like, Mother Nature has done her part. But here we're talking about rare earths and how they're controlled, right? And we're looking at this slide and how it kind of shows that at one point, China had complete control of rare earths, and it was only recently that the other countries started to expand to be able to have some type of supply other than relying on China. You kind of see a spike here in 2021, but still, and I would put that on, a national security level that, hey, what's going on? Why aren't people paying attention to this? Controlling rare earths, somebody needs to be woken up and say, hey, why are we doing this? Why are we allowing another country to control everything? And
talk a little bit, Randy, what they're doing in Africa as well.
Yeah, and that's where they control right here. It was rare monopoly. So when they say monopoly, it doesn't mean it's all in China. It goes what you're talking about, where China has gone in and has provided loans to these countries to build their infrastructure. And as these countries are unable to pay, then they're making deals to say, okay, well, we understand, we'll forgive the loan for rights to control certain things like a port or other things. And I found that out through another YouTuber out there called Joe Blogs, who does a very good job analyzing a lot of these different global situations. And so, if someone gets a chance to look him up, definitely look him up and check him out. But he really gets into the details and kind of breaks it down and peels the onion back and really finds different things to help people know what's going on out there. And that's where this rare earth, they were controlling a port in Nigeria. And they said, we'll just forgive the loan so long as we get to control the port. Or we'll trade you access to the port for fuel or oil. So China's been very strategic, and we've known that for years, that they're very strategic. And that's where, as businesses and countries, we need to be more interested in what's really going on out there.
More proactive, yeah.
More proactive, absolutely. And we're getting a couple more slides here we found here. Oh, here's the countries, our companies that are controlling the microchip market. Again, and I found this one was others. Others. Well,
Uh-oh.
who's others? What does others mean? What does others mean?
Okay, Samsung making those TVs, huh?
Yeah, Samsung, what was it, Micron? They're the ones doing the major investment
In the
here in the
United
United
States.
States,
Yep.
but
40 billion.
Samsung and Intel are the big ones right now, and then Micron wants to, jump in and start to become a big dog and a player.
Yeah, and Randy, can we talk about that too a little bit? What we saw in the news too about that, about how they are trying to take resilience and how these countries now,
Oh
like
yeah,
you're right, South Korea, Japan, United States,
let me
all
share my
trying to work together, and
screen.
Taiwan are all working together.
And that's where you're talking about there, that the as a government,
Fab Four.
they were looking. Yeah, here it is, the Fab Four. They were meeting to coordinate resilience, the things that you and I have been talking about for the last 6 months that as supply chain managers, leaders in this area, that we need to start building our own resilience. I'll say resilience awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I was talking to you about this specifically. Matter of fact, what was it? It was something you were telling me a story about ball bearings or something, right? Where you had only so many ball bearings available and you couldn't get them, and as a result, you went out and created a company or created competition because the one company that had a control wasn't being very helpful. You remember that story you were telling me?
Yeah. So there was some ball bearings we needed from a certain company, big company. They're the ones that manufacture it. Sometimes it's in our best interest to tighten quality requirements, especially for complex items that will put maybe who the source on the drawing is, right? Okay, like so this specific assembly needs to go to company A, B, C, and D. So in that example that I was telling you about, the manufacturer of that ball bearing was taking too long. They weren't able to maintain raw materials in stock. They were giving a lot of the ball bearings to the automotive industry and leaving me behind because I wasn't a major buyer of their items. I'm ordering 4 to 5 pieces, 5, 6 bearings, right? The manufacturing, the Chevys, the Fords are ordering by the hundreds of thousands, right? Why do they care about me? So one of
Right.
our suggestions, one of the things we did solutions to that was open up that requirement right on that drawing, qualify other suppliers who are able to manufacture that bearing and bring them into the table and create, like you said, a sense of competition. And then also from resilience, secondary, tertiary sources of supply. If that primary supplier is unable to manufacture and get us the parts that we need at the quality, the time, and the price that we need it, we had other options.
Yeah, when you told me that story, one of the things I was thinking about was who was driving the decision to then go find another source and create more competition so that you wouldn't have to rely on this. Was it a director, vice president? What level was that decision being driven out?
Because that was me at my level, right? And
Okay.
this also shows the importance about why even buyers can't just be transactional people. If you're in supply chain, you can't be just a transactional thinker. You have to be a strategic thinker, right? Buyers
Right.
are on the front lines. They're the ones in the trenches, placing the orders, talking to the suppliers. I was telling you, only customer service and supply chain are the main ones that are talking to organizations outside of our own organization, right? Supply chain is
Right.
talking to suppliers, customer service is talking, of course, customers. So I'm the boots on ground. I'm the
Yeah.
one that's getting the current and the most relevant intelligence about our supply chain, right? Or my suppliers is giving me free intelligence with a quote, with price and lead time. If I'm already seeing, right, like we're talking about with my example with the microchips, the lead times are starting to skyrocket. The prices are starting to skyrocket. Raise the flag. Let my manager know. Let management know. Let the rest of the team know that, hey, I'm starting to see an issue, and we need to start addressing it before it becomes an even bigger issue.
And that's that ability to envision the future, right? Being able to see 2 to 3 years down the way. And like a leading indicator to you is a lead time has increased from 2 weeks to 30 days or 90 days. Wait a second, something's changing here. and getting that up. But, one, having the talent at the buyer level to recognize there's a problem or something happening, and then having the leadership in place that can make decisions and take that buyer's input and make something happen with that, right? It's not just, it's like you went to your director and said, hey, there's a problem. That director could have ignored you, or they could listen to you. In this case, they listened to you and they helped build that alternate supply.
And let's go back to that example too, Rennie. It's not, there's different ways where we could have just continued with the path and just take the hit from the supplier, take the hit on the chin and say, okay, well, can you give it to me when you can? Please hurry. Go over there, knock on their door, scream at them a little bit. Right. But at the end of the day, there was a more creative solution. Right? Being in manufacturing, we're able to put into that design authority, design other suppliers that we can use.
Right.
Sometimes it can be simple just as that.
And that's the leadership part of it, right? To where so many people are like, oh, he's just supply chain or he's procurement or purchasing. There's no leadership down there. Like, no, that so much of that leadership, and it's a leadership style of influence.
That's right.
That makes this possible. It's not driving, you're going to do it because I said so. You're going to do it because the policy says so. Policy's policy. I don't care. I'll ignore policies all day long. But if I work with someone I trust who says, hey, there's a problem and I understand it and they can articulate it well, then there's something there to talk about. Again, leadership at this point. We talked about training. Here we're talking about leadership. All of this is wrapped around resilience, which we'll talk a little bit towards the end about the resilience workshop coming up here at the end of April, that people may want to consider joining us to learn more about resilience, and so that they can do what the Fab 4 is doing, which is mapping their supply chain across where all the sources are, from raw material all the way to customer delivery. So they're looking into the rare earth, they're looking into the mining of silicon, they're looking into all those different things and mapping that supply chain. And then as countries, they're building in redundancy. They're building in redundancy, and that's what's really important.
And they're also building kind of like an alarm system, right?
That was right.
An advanced warning system as well. And this is a great example that can fit into our supply chain as an example. In that example, they're using countries, but for us, we can also use suppliers, right? Having that collaborative approach that we always talk about when in all of our webinars that we've been discussing, we always talk about collaboration. In this example, the Fab 4, US, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea are creating an early warning system where if any one of them sees an issue in the supply chain, they let the rest of the supply chain, which is the other countries, know that, hey, we're dealing with this really big issue or something's coming up. This is what we're seeing. What can you do on your end? What can we do together to help find a solution to this issue? But it's being proactive and quick. So just like in the Army, right? Violence on the objective, quick, find a solution and move on.
And that goes back to the system we talked about earlier this year, early in January. We're talking about the system and the alert, and that's what you're talking about now. They're mapped it out, they're analyzing the key data and the data that tells them, hey, there's a problem, and then sending that out. And that's definitely important. So here's another slide about spending, who's spending the money on different technologies. When we talk about semiconductor equipment spending worldwide, here they're talking about who's building infrastructure to make semiconductors. And as we can see here, who's been doing the largest investment for a long, long, long time. China, Taiwan, but China and Taiwan are neighbors. I mean, they're so close together, and then, South Korea. We don't see North America, very, very little. Europe, very, very little. Very little, across the board. So we can definitely see why there's a monopoly, because it's been allowed to happen.
Yeah. Now we have to play catch up.
Play catch up and then prevent things in the future.
Right.
And that's again where we the talk now about globalization just crumbling. Countries have to take care of themselves, right? At the end of the day, it's nice that we can support other countries by allowing them to produce things, but by allowing them to produce critical things, we expose ourselves to vulnerability, and we have to be aware of that. We definitely have to be aware of that. So let's see here. What else we got here? Oh, revenue, foundries. So this is where, foundries, who's making the different microchips out there and those type of things, which is good. So, so this discussion tonight's been really good in, kind of outlining the need to have resilience as something that you're always thinking about, something that you're always thinking about. That, you know, as you've mentioned many times, it's a constant, it's a state of mind. It's not something that you think about now and think about later. So as you're looking at this as an industry, as a practitioner, you're in industry right now, and you look at that microchip situation, what are some of the things going through your mind? What are you thinking about?
Like I said, right, is security of supply. How do I make sure that I'm going to get my stuff when I need it, or even just minimize the damage? Going back to the example with the ball bearings, right? What are some of your contingencies that you can have in place so that you can, one, either limit the damage from disruption, or to totally keep it from happening? And in this example with
Right.
with the microchips, it's probably going to be pretty hard to totally stop it from happening. But what are some actions that you can take, right? Well, who are your other suppliers that you have? Do you have relationships? Do you need to start building relationships with other suppliers? Do you need to start looking now at your design, right? Or do you have any vulnerabilities within your design that's going to be hard for your supply chain to deliver to, right? Where are your suppliers located? Is your supply chain already mapped out so you know exactly where your stuff's coming from, right? Is all your stuff coming from from one area? Is it, you know, are this parts that you're coming, is it going to see where from countries where there's geopolitical issues and that you can predict something to happen in the future? And what things can you do, what are you doing to you know, take accountability of your supply chain?
And everything you just mentioned is what we're going to be talking about in Supply Chain Resilience 101 at the end of April. The link to the event will be in the description. You can definitely, you know, check it out and see what the agenda is going to be about. But everything that Howard just described is what we're talking about, is, you know, the ability to map it out, link it all together, understand it, see how it works together, get those alerts in place. And you may be thinking, well, this needs to be something done at the corporate level. Well, if you're a purchasing buyer, category manager, supply chain manager, you know, of any title that you may have in the supply chain field, you need to understand this stuff from the bigger picture point of view. It's not just, you know, it's not just, well, I'll worry about my little piece. You got to look at everything. So yeah, you know, you're in little pieces. You got to think about the raw materials used to make those little pieces and put those together. So it's not something that to be ignored. You know, it's something definitely not to be ignored, and something we want to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I got something for that too, Randy.
Yeah,
You know,
go ahead.
pre-COVID, I was even just walking through the grocery store at Costco the other day and was thinking, you know, pre-COVID, just people weren't used to things not being on the shelf and
Oh,
things
that's
not
right.
being
Yeah.
there when you need it. Now all of a sudden after COVID, it's like it's a normal now, right? Like, hey, I go to the store to buy XYZ. I go there. I gotta settle with this, or maybe I'll try a different store. Well, that store don't have it. Go to this other store. That's like such the norm now with supply chains, right? It's always happening. And
Yeah.
well, my point is that the days of having a reliant supply chain where you can have a set strategy in place and this stretch playbook that you got, and this is what we're gonna do, and everything's fine, right? Just in time delivery. We don't need any kind of inventory, safety inventory. We don't need none of that. Those days are over. You really need to have some kind of supply chain strategy, and especially a supply chain resilience strategy. You know, we
Right.
talk and harp about it all the time, but if you're not getting your product that you need in order to deliver to the customer, right? Going back to our webinars before, even down to the 50-cent screw that's holding up hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, you're already screwed.
Right.
And that's where we talk about too, where everyone in the supply chain industry, everyone in the supply chain department at your organization needs to be a strategic thinker, right? Going
Mhm.
back to that again, to that example where we raise the flag, if we're already starting to see issues, right? Because we have to be proactive
Yeah.
and have to be able to react quickly. No longer the days of supply chains being stringent. They have to be fluid. They have to be able to be flexible and react quickly because things are always changing. Just like with this microchip stuff. This wasn't a couple years ago. This wasn't even a thought, and now we're reacting now, right? And we got all these countries are now trying to bring semiconductor manufacturing back to their companies. Well, China's already been on it. So now,
Yeah.
we, like you said, we keep talking about we have to play catch up. So it just shows just how the ways of supply chain has changed a lot. And now in supply chain, we need thinkers and analytical thinkers, right? Out of the box
Yeah.
thinkers.
And it's something that can be taught. It's not something that you're born with, you know,
Yep.
yourself, and think about it. And what you talked about, the alert to be able to respond quickly. And what I was going to mention in past webinars, we've talked about the the MU and the EOC and all this. And one of the main points we talk about during those webinars is the time it takes to build that instantaneous response, the training time, everything else. Especially in our last webinar, you had a great moment there where you talked a lot about how the military is very good at training and taking people from all walks of life, and then in a short amount of time, very rapidly assembling them into a functional team that can be dominant in the battlefield. And it goes back to supply chain teams, and as a professional in supply chain, if you're a buyer of any type, contract manager, sourcing, any type, to professionalize yourself is what I would say. You've got to think this level. We've talked a lot, the example we're talking about is microchip. In the future, we're going to talk about other industries too, about the impact of the supply chain, and that the buyer just makes a big difference. And we want to make sure that people are aware of that if you're not training, you got to be thinking, you got to really think about it. And again, one of the reasons we're doing this webinar. So
we're going to go ahead. Training, we're right. Talk about training too, real quick, right? With the military, we're always training for scenarios, for situations. We call it, right, where we have our playbook and we follow it. But we're also, we have a set strategy of things that we're doing in the military, but we also have to continuously practice it and refine and rehearse it, right? We always call refine and rehearse, right? We make sure that what we do, we figure out what was done well, what could do better, refine it, and do it again. And just like with supply chain resilience is like that.
And you know what's key about that? The enemy's doing the same thing.
That's right.
Right. So you're thinking, refining, and learning. So when you go back into that situation, that same situation, it's not going to be the same situation, because the other side is also thinking and learning and trying to figure out a way to win. Agreed. And that's what your competitors are doing. So if you're not thinking this way and building a team that constantly thinks this way, then you're kind of starting to slow down,
and get left behind.
And left behind. Yeah. So, just to kind of wrap up, we want to definitely thank our sponsor here tonight, Supply Chain Jobs. They are, critical to helping supply chain managers advance their career. If you want a free review of your resume by a professional, definitely go to scm.jobs. Go ahead and create an account, submit your resume, and you'll have a professional actually review your resume and give you feedback. And in the future here, we're going to be having some career coaches giving us advice on how to advance our careers. And don't forget about Howard's book, Secrets to an Unbreakable Supply Chain. You can definitely visit his website, which is hknapp.com. Did I say that right? Huh? Yeah, so wait, here it is. There we go.
There you go.
You can definitely take a look at it, and what's good about Howard, what he's done, he's willing to give you a free chapter to take a look at this book, and so you realize the value there, then you get the rest of the book when you're ready.
So kind of
so kind of, yes, it is, of course. And then we're, of course, we talked before about our resilience workshop coming up in Los Angeles on the 28th of April. The description in the box will be, or in the description will be, a link to the event page, so you can learn more about the event. So you can go ahead and register, and that'll help you learn the things we're talking about now. It's a one-day work. It's not a lot of time that you need to commit, but the information you're going to get is going to be invaluable. It's going to give you this thought process that we've described several times tonight, that we want you to adopt and institutionalize in a way of thinking. That's really helpful. And then, of course, we'll also be doing that week, the Supply Chain Certification Bootcamp, which will be going the week before. And if you're interested in that, go to CPSM Training to learn more about that. And that, again, those links will be into the description below. So with that, Howard, let's, I know we didn't quite do an introduction, but how should people connect with you? In addition to getting a chapter from your book on your website, what's another way for them to connect with you, to learn more about you and get some information from you?
Well, I'm also on LinkedIn, HNAP-CPSM. LinkedIn, that's my email address. My LinkedIn address. So please go there, add me, follow me. I put out constant material every week. Me and Randy, by myself, putting stuff out about resilience.
And same thing with me. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Connect with me. Message me. It's the best way to connect and get to network, build your network. Because as soon as we're connected, you get to see my network, and we can collaborate and build different things that are out there. So hopefully everyone has a good night. That's going to wrap up our discussion for this week. But be on the lookout for future webinars just like this, where we are going to talk about current issues in the supply chain and what you need to do to improve resilience improve your professionalism in supply chain, and just, be better prepared for a changing and dynamic world as globalization starts to crumble and you have to rely more on your own supply chain. And you